The katana blade gleamed under the dojo lights, 3 feet of folded steel that had been in Miyamoto Keiko's family for 6 generations. She held it in perfect Chudan no Kamaye stance, the traditional middle guard position, with the blade angled toward Bruce Lee's throat. Bruce stood 10 feet away, shirtless, unarmed, hands open in a Wing Chun ready position. Behind them, 30 karate students sat in stunned silence, watching what should have been impossible. A martial artist accepting a challenge from a sword master without any weapon. This is the story of the most controversial martial arts demonstration in Tokyo history, and why the Japanese Sword Federation tried to have all footage of the event destroyed. Shinjuku Dojo, Tokyo, Japan, March 8, 1971. The dojo belonged to Master Takeshi Yamamoto, a 7th Dan karate instructor who had studied under Gichin Funakoshi himself, and maintained one of the most respected traditional training facilities in Tokyo. The dojo operated under old-school rules. No tournaments, no trophies, only serious students seeking genuine martial arts knowledge. Master Yamamoto had invited Bruce Lee to give a demonstration of Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do to his advanced students, curious about these Chinese and hybrid systems that were gaining attention in martial arts circles. Miyamoto Keiko was not part of Yamamoto's regular student body. She was a 28-year-old kendo and iaido master who held 5th Dan rankings in both arts, coming from a samurai family that had served the Tokugawa shogunate before the Meiji Restoration. Her great-great-grandfather had been a renowned swordsman, and the family katana she carried had seen real combat in the Boshin War of 1868. Keiko had dedicated her life to preserving traditional Japanese sword arts, training 6 hours daily since age 7, and she viewed the recent influx of foreign martial arts into Japan with skepticism bordering on hostility. She had come to Yamamoto's dojo specifically because she heard Bruce Lee would be there, intending to make a point about the superiority of classical Japanese martial arts over what she considered trendy, modern systems. During Bruce's demonstration of wooden dummy techniques and pad work, Keiko had stood in the back of the dojo, arms crossed, expression making her disapproval obvious. When Bruce finished and opened the floor for questions, Keiko stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Mr. Lee, I have watched your demonstration with interest, and I must say I am not impressed by these techniques against cooperative partners and inanimate training equipment. Traditional martial arts were developed for real combat against armed opponents, not for performance. I am a practitioner of classical Japanese sword arts, and I believe your methods would fail completely against someone trained in traditional weapons." Her Japanese was formal and precise, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never lost a match in her discipline. Bruce listened respectfully, then responded in his limited but functional Japanese, supplemented with English that Master Yamamoto translated. "I appreciate your perspective, and you're correct that many modern martial arts have lost connection with practical application. However, effective technique should work regardless of whether the opponent is armed or unarmed. The principles remain the same: timing, distance management, and understanding of body mechanics and human limitations." Keiko's expression hardened. "Principles are abstractions. Reality is steel. If you truly believe your methods are effective, would you demonstrate them against a real blade?" She gestured to the katana resting in its stand near the dojo entrance. "That is my family sword, sharpened for tameshigiri practice. If you can defeat me while I wield it, I will acknowledge that your techniques have merit. If you cannot, you should stop teaching students methods that would get them killed in real confrontation." The dojo went completely silent. Every student understood what Keiko was proposing: a challenge match between an unarmed martial artist and a sword master using a live blade. Master Yamamoto stood immediately, preparing to refuse on Bruce's behalf and eject Keiko from the dojo for such a dangerous and inappropriate suggestion. But Bruce raised his hand politely, indicating he wanted to respond. "I accept your challenge, but under specific conditions. First, your blade must be real and sharp, as you described, no training sword. Second, you must attempt to strike me with genuine intent, as you would a real opponent. Third, we establish a time limit of 3 minutes. If I cannot disarm you or force you to yield within that time, I acknowledge your point about traditional arts. If I succeed, you acknowledge that effective technique transcends style and weapons. Agreed?" Keiko nodded once, sharply. "Agreed. But understand, Mr. Lee, I have trained with this sword since I was a child. I have cut through rolled tatami, bamboo, and suspended targets. My family art is Tenshin Shoden Katori Shinto-ryu, one of the oldest koryu in Japan. You are making a serious mistake." She walked to the sword stand, lifted the katana with both hands, and drew it slowly from its saya. The blade caught the light, showing the distinctive wavy hamon line of traditional Japanese sword-making. Several students audibly gasped, recognizing this was not a demonstration weapon, but a true shinken, a live blade. Master Yamamoto pulled Bruce aside and spoke urgently in Japanese and English. "Lee-san, this is extremely dangerous. Miyamoto-san is a legitimate sword expert. That blade can remove a limb with minimal effort. Even a shallow cut could sever tendons or arteries. Please reconsider this match." Bruce smiled and placed a hand on the older master's shoulder. "I understand the danger, Yamamoto-sensei, and I respect your concern. But this is exactly the kind of challenge that tests whether martial arts are practical or merely theoretical. I've trained specifically for weapon defense scenarios. This is an opportunity to demonstrate those principles." The students rearranged themselves, sitting in rows along the walls, to clear maximum space in the center of the dojo. Keiko performed a brief ritual bow to her sword, then took a position at one end of the training area. Bruce walked to the opposite end, removed his shoes per dojo etiquette, and stood barefoot on the polished wooden floor. He rolled his shoulders once, took 3 deep breaths to center himself, and settled into a loose, ready stance, weight evenly distributed, hands open and relaxed at chest level. Master Yamamoto positioned himself as referee, though he clearly hoped to stop the match before anyone got seriously hurt. He looked at both participants, received a nod from each, and spoke the traditional command. "Hajime, begin." Keiko advanced immediately, closing distance with smooth, practiced steps, her blade held in Seigen no Kame, the point aimed directly at Bruce's eyes, a classic psychological and practical position that threatens the opponent's vision while maintaining defensive capability. Bruce moved laterally, circling at the edge of what traditional kenjutsu practitioners call mai, the critical distance where an attack becomes possible. He was studying her movement patterns, the subtle weight shifts that preceded strikes, the way her hands gripped the tsuka. Keiko struck without warning, a men cut aimed at the top of Bruce's head, executed with textbook form and surprising speed. The blade descended in a perfect arc, the kind of cut that would split a rolled straw mat cleanly through. Bruce moved his head exactly 4 inches to the left, while simultaneously stepping in toward Keiko rather than away, violating the instinctive response to retreat from a blade. The katana passed through empty air where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier, and Bruce's forward movement placed him inside the sword's effective range, where the blade's length became a disadvantage rather than an advantage. His right hand shot out in a Wing Chun Pak Sao, a slapping deflection that struck Keiko's forward wrist just as the sword completed its downward arc, pushing the blade further offline and disrupting her ability to immediately recover for a second cut. His left hand simultaneously grabbed her right elbow, controlling the joint and preventing her from rotating the blade back toward him. The entire sequence took perhaps 2 seconds, but Bruce had already established a position where the sword was temporarily neutralized. Keiko's training immediately activated. She executed a Tai Sabaki, a body rotation designed to break free from grabs and re-establish optimal distance. She succeeded in pulling away from Bruce's initial control, but the brief contact had given him crucial information about her strength, balance, and reaction speed. They separated to neutral distance, and Keiko adjusted her assessment of her opponent. He had moved with precision she had not expected, and his timing had been impeccable. She attacked again, this time with a tsuki, a thrust aimed at Bruce's solar plexus, a faster and more difficult technique to defend against than the men cut. Bruce demonstrated why decades of Chisao training creates reflexes that operate faster than conscious thought. His hands moved in a Tan Sao and Bong Sao combination, deflecting the thrust just enough to pass by his torso while simultaneously closing distance again. But Keiko had anticipated this, and she executed a horizontal kisa cut, slashing diagonally across Bruce's path with enough force to sever ribs. What happened next became the subject of analysis and debate for years afterward. Bruce dropped his weight suddenly, lowering his entire body 6 inches through pure leg compression, causing the blade to pass over his shoulder by a hair's breadth. Students in the front row later reported they could see individual hairs on Bruce's head move in the wake of the blade. As Keiko's momentum carried the sword past its target, Bruce's right leg swept her front foot, a Wing Chun technique called a sok choi sweep, disrupting her base at the moment when her weight was most committed to the cut. Keiko stumbled but maintained her grip on the katana, spinning on her back foot to face Bruce again. She was breathing harder now, frustrated that she had delivered 2 potentially lethal cuts that should have connected but somehow missed. Bruce remained calm, centered, showing no sign of stress or fatigue. They had been engaged for approximately 90 seconds. The next exchange happened so quickly that even experienced martial artists watching had difficulty processing the details. Keiko feinted a high cut, then dropped into a suryuj, a sliding deflection attack aimed at Bruce's extended arm, intending to cut the tendons and disable his ability to defend. Bruce recognized the feint, didn't commit to defending the high attack, and when the real cut came at his arm, he executed a Bil Sao, a thrusting finger strike that intercepted Keiko's hands rather than the blade itself, striking the pressure points on the back of her hands with enough force to momentarily disrupt her grip strength. The katana wavered in her hands for just a fraction of a second, but that was enough. Bruce's other hand wrapped around her right wrist, his body rotated using his hips as a fulcrum, and suddenly Keiko found herself being pulled forward and down by her own committed force. She had 2 choices: release the sword or fall forward onto her face. Her samurai pride wouldn't allow her to release her family blade voluntarily, so she fell, and Bruce guided that fall precisely, controlling her descent so she landed safely but firmly on the dojo floor, face down, with Bruce behind her maintaining control of her right wrist and the sword hand. He applied what Wing Chun practitioners call a chin-na lock, a joint manipulation that made it mechanically impossible for Keiko to maintain her grip or move the blade. The pain receptors in her wrist fired immediately. Her hand opened reflexively, and the katana clattered to the wooden floor. Bruce immediately released the lock, stepped back, and bowed respectfully. The entire match had lasted 2 minutes and 45 seconds, 15 seconds under the agreed time limit. Master Yamamoto stood frozen, his hand halfway raised to signal the end of the match, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The students erupted in confused chatter, some shocked, some excited, all trying to understand how an unarmed fighter had disarmed a legitimate swordmaster without getting cut once. Keiko remained on the floor for a long moment, staring at her empty hand and the katana lying 2 feet away. Bruce walked to where the sword lay, picked it up carefully with both hands, as one should handle a katana, and carried it back to Keiko, who had risen to a sitting position. He presented it to her formally, blade facing himself as a sign of respect and non-aggression. "Miyamoto-san, you are an exceptional swordsman. Your technique is precise, your cuts were genuine, and you honored our agreement to fight with full intent. I did not defeat your art. I simply applied principles that work against any attack, armed or unarmed. Timing, positioning, and understanding of mechanical advantage. Your traditional training is valuable and should be preserved. But all martial arts, traditional or modern, must be tested against resistance to remain effective." Keiko took her sword, returned it to its saya, and performed a formal rei, a deep bow from a seated position. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "I have trained with this sword for 21 years. I have defeated over 200 opponents in kendo matches. I have never been disarmed. You did not use tricks or luck. You understood the weaknesses in sword combat that most unarmed fighters never comprehend, that the weapon is only effective at certain distances and angles, and that controlling the hand that holds the weapon is more important than avoiding the weapon itself. I was wrong to challenge you with arrogance, and I was wrong to assume traditional methods are superior simply because they are old." March 8, 1971. Shinjuku Dojo. 30 witnesses. 2 minutes and 45 seconds that changed Keiko Miyamoto's understanding of combat and led her to spend the next 3 years studying Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do alongside her traditional sword arts. She went on to become one of Japan's leading advocates for cross-training between different martial systems, writing extensively about how traditional arts must adapt and test themselves against other methodologies. Bruce returned to Hong Kong the next day and rarely discussed the match publicly, considering it a private demonstration rather than a public challenge. The Japanese Sword Federation requested that Master Yamamoto not distribute any photographs or details of the event, concerned it would encourage dangerous weapon challenges, but several students kept personal notes that eventually became the basis for this account.